Today, I thought we would look at the 10 nations that have a grudge against good old Uncle Sam because the United States has recently started to irritate some of her longtime friends. These, in my opinion, are the nations that are moving away from the US. I have left out the US's fiercest adversaries, such as China, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, and Russia. Additionally, I have not considered the effects of the latest tariff tussle that the US has initiated. Let us start. 10. Denmark. Although Denmark has been a staunch ally of the United States, Washington has put its patience to the test. The ongoing Greenland issue began in 2019 when Donald Trump, who was president at the time, stated that he was considering purchasing Greenland from Denmark. Of course, this isn't strange. Earlier, the U.S. purchased Alaska from Russia in 1867. Since returning to the White House, Trump has continued to discuss acquiring Greenland. Copenhagen is feeling the growing skepticism of its Nordic neighbors regarding U.S. influence. Denmark is not entirely anti-U.S. though. 9. Mexico. Mexico and the U.S. have long had a complex relationship. Mexico has strengthened ties with China and Latin American economies, reducing its dependence on the U.S. China surpassed the U.S. as Mexico's top trading partner in 2025, with trade exceeding $130 billion. Meanwhile, the U.S. continues its strict border policies, souring relations. President Andrés Manuel López Obrador has denounced Washington's approach, while Mexico has invited Chinese and Russian companies to help with energy projects once controlled by U.S. firms. Mexico is increasingly seeking new political and economic alliances. 8. Brazil. Brazil and the United States have had a complex relationship for decades, with Brazil acting as a strong critic at times and as a strategic partner at others. However, in 2025 things have gotten worse. Brazil has publicly challenged U.S. power in Latin America by strengthening its ties with China and Russia during President Laino Lula da Silva's ongoing leadership. With almost 30% of its foreign trade being conducted in Chinese yuan rather than U.S. dollars, Brazil's trade policies have progressively favored the BRICS countries. Meanwhile, hostility has only grown as a result of Washington's penalties on Brazil's main agricultural exports, especially soybeans and beef. The last straw was Brazil's recent rejection of a U.S. military cooperation deal in favor of strengthening defense ties with Moscow. In just 2 years, Brazil's purchases of Russian weapons rose by 45%. In Brazil, public sentiment is likewise changing. According to a Pew Research poll from 2025, only 34% of Brazilians have a positive opinion of the U.S., a sharp drop from 52% in 2020. Brazil's economic realignment and growing anti-American sentiment make it evident that it is forging its own course. Germany and the United States share a long-standing alliance, but tensions have grown in recent years. The NSA spying scandal, trade disputes, and U.S. pressure on Europe to increase defense spending have strained relations. The Nord Stream 2 pipeline controversy further deepened the divide as Washington opposed Germany's energy ties with Russia, citing geopolitical risks and its own natural gas exports. Additionally, Germany prefers diplomatic engagement with China and Russia while the U.S. pushes for a more confrontational stance. Economic disagreements have also emerged, particularly over the U.S. Inflation Reduction Act, which Berlin views as protectionist. Meanwhile, Germany is advocating for greater European defense autonomy, reducing reliance on NATO. Public sentiment reflects this shift. A 2025 YouGov poll found that 60% of Germans believe the U.S. has excessive influence over European affairs. As Berlin prioritizes its own economic and security interests, its alignment with Washington is weakening. After the U.S. secretly negotiated a defense pact with Australia and the U.K., Australia cancelled a major submarine contract with France, prompting President Macron to call it a stab in the back. While France may be critical of the U.S., it's not severing ties completely. France is pushing for more European independence, both politically and economically. Macron advocates for a Europe less reliant on the U.S. for security, even suggesting Europe should build its own defense system instead of depending on NATO. France is also challenging U.S. economic dominance, with the EU exploring trade alternatives to the U.S. dollar. Additionally, France has criticized U.S. foreign policies, especially regarding China and military interventions. Macron emphasizes Europe's need to act in its own interests, not simply follow Washington. Although still a U.S. ally, France's shift signals a reduction in America's influence over one of Europe's strongest nations. Once a close ally of the U.S., Saudi Arabia is increasingly distancing itself due to shifting dynamics in oil human rights issues and geopolitical alliances. The U.S. has reduced its reliance on Saudi oil, reducing the kingdom's leverage over Washington. As America boosts domestic oil production and electric vehicles gain popularity, Saudi Arabia has turned to China and Russia for new partnerships. In 2025, Saudi Arabia began pricing a significant portion of its oil sales in Chinese yuan, challenging the US dollar's dominance in global trade. Exports to China have soared while those to the US dropped by 40%. Tensions also rose after the U.S. froze arms sales to Saudi Arabia over human rights concerns, prompting Riyadh to finalize a $15 billion defense deal with Russia. In 2024, Saudi Arabia officially joined BRICS, signaling a shift in its geopolitical alliances. With these moves, Saudi Arabia is no longer waiting for Washington's approval in any matter. Turkey and the United States have long had a complex relationship, but 2025 could mark a breaking point. Once a key NATO ally and a stronghold of Western influence in the Middle East, Turkey under President Erdogan is pursuing a more independent foreign policy. A major blow came in early 2025 when Turkey decided to purchase additional Russian S-400 missile defense systems, defying U.S. warnings. In response, the United States imposed further sanctions, straining relations. Meanwhile, Turkey has been deepening economic ties with China, with trade surpassing $50 billion annually, and joined the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, a security alliance led by Beijing and Moscow. Anti-American sentiment is on the rise, with 68% of Turkish citizens in a 2025 survey viewing the United States as a threat to national security. As Turkey shifts its economic and military alignments, its future with the United States remains uncertain. India remains skeptical of U.S. reliability, frustrated by Washington's ties with Pakistan and its lectures on democracy and trade. Strengthening ties with Russia and expressing concerns over U.S. unpredictability, India has shifted towards asserting its independence. In 2025, India took a leading role in BRICS and expanded trade with Russia, hitting a record $50 billion despite U.S. sanctions. India also resisted U.S. pressure on defense, signing a $7 billion deal with Russia. Public opinion has shifted, with only 42% of Indians viewing the United States favorably. India's growing independence raises questions about its future alignment with U.S. interests. South Africa's historical ties with the United States have been lukewarm, but 2025 marks a clear shift toward new alliances. As a BRICS member, South Africa has aligned itself more closely with China and Russia, strongly opposing what it sees as Western economic dominance. In a significant move, Pretoria refused to support U.S. sanctions on Russia. By 2025, bilateral trade between South Africa and Russia exceeded $3.5 billion. Tensions with the United States have escalated over Washington's pressure on South Africa to support Western-backed policies on African affairs. Pretoria has openly criticized U.S. military involvement on the continent, calling it neo-colonialism. Anti-American protests have surged, and a 2025 Ipsos poll showed U.S. favorability in South Africa dropped to just 27%. South Africa is clearly charting its own course, and that no longer includes Washington. Panama's relationship with the United States has changed drastically since the U.S. controlled the Panama Canal until 1999. While still friendly, Panama is increasingly turning toward China as a more reliable partner. China's heavy investment in Panama as part of its Belt and Road Initiative has reduced Panama's dependence on the United States. Many Panamanians remember the 1989 U.S. invasion to remove dictator Manuel Noriega, which they viewed as imperialism. Now, with China emerging as a significant economic player in the region, Panama is moving away from the United States. Despite the U.S. discussing regaining control of the canal, Panama's shifting allegiances could complicate matters, especially if China gains further influence, creating potential risks for the United States. Please express your opinion in the comment box. Thank you.